If you're working with a map, it needs to stand up to the test of time, it needs to stand up to weather conditions, and it needs to stand up to the abuse that you put it through. When you're using a map, it shouldn't be a burden on you and it shouldn't be difficult to use. We need to figure out ways to simplify these tools. Living in the Pacific Northwest, there is a lot of opportunity for me to ruin things or have things become compromised because of the environment or the elements that I'm in. Because tools like maps, usually made of paper, will disintegrate or become degraded over time when it's out in the elements. Today, I want to spend a little bit of time showing you how you can simplify and ease your map reading, especially when it's an 8.5 by 11 size piece of paper. With this simple modification, it'll help your maps maintain its structural integrity, readability, and also usability during your time out in the wilderness or out doing whatever it is you're doing and when you're in inclement weather. It'll also afford you the opportunity to be able to write on the map and then erase it later, so that way you're not permanently damaging this map or permanently marking this map, and you can continue to use it for days, weeks, even years at a time. You guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Subscription is free and it allows us to be able to get a larger reach and hopefully provide quality content to people who are looking for it. We're also looking for your specific input. If this video, while watching it, sparks any comments or questions about this content, or you have ideas for other videos that you would like to see, please leave a comment or reach out to us on our social media pages, in our direct messages, and we'll try to accommodate what videos you guys want to see next. Here are the products and a quick breakdown of the costs of what I use. For the colored prints, I don't currently own a printer, so I go to the FedEx print shop that's local to me. Each colored copy sheet individually is 71 cents, and if you own your own printer, that cost could be a lot less for you. I'm also using the 3mm thick BindTech self-laminating sheets. Now, there is 2 sheets that are used per map that you make, per page of map, and the 2 sheets of lamination are 56 cents for the 2. Altogether, between the cost to have someone print the colored copies as well as the lamination sheets, we're looking at $1.27. Again, if you own your own printer and you have the ability to do colored copies, or you don't care about colored copies and you just do a black and white copy, your costs are going to be a lot less than what you're seeing here. All right, so we've got our individual sheet and we have 2 pieces of lamination here. We'll start by removing the backer of 1 piece of lamination, placing it on the table, and then we will put the map onto that lamination. And we'll work from one side to the other, trying to minimize the amount of air bubbles that we have within that piece of lamination as it adheres to the map. From there, we'll take our other side of lamination, peel the backer from it, and then place it as centered as possible and as equal as possible to the first piece of lamination. So that way we maximize the amount of lamination mating surface on the outside of this map. And what you just saw there is I was working my way around the edge here. And what I'm doing is I'm verifying that both of these surfaces have sealed against each other. So now that we have the camera zoomed in a little bit, hopefully you can see that right here, you can see how there's a little bit of an air pocket. And then there's a pretty good seal right here. A little bit of an air pocket, and then the paper itself. Now that's important because when we go to trim the tag end off of this, we want to make sure not to impact that little air bubble, because that could compromise the seal that we have. So if we're using this specifically to water sealing and waterproofing this map, then if we have compromised that seal, that is a place that allows for moisture to get in there and then also start to ruin the map. For example, here's a map that I rushed trying to do the seal, and you can see how here's the original piece of lamination, here's the secondary piece of lamination, and how that basically rides along the edge of that piece of paper. Now what that's going to do is that's going to minimize the effectiveness between these two pieces sealing together. And that'll allow for water to eventually work its way in through the lamination and affect the map itself. So we will use this as an example of what could potentially happen in the negative side effects, but we also have a couple different copies that we'll use to test the effectiveness of this map sealing method. So now that we have our maps laminated, we are going to cut the tag ends off of this map, and again, trying not to impact really close to this piece of paper as it sits within the two pieces of lamination, because that could compromise the seal that we've created with the lamination. You can use scissors. I just so happen to have a cutter here, which is a little bit easier, but scissors just work fine as well. So now what we've done is we've trimmed off the tag end. Still allowed for that little air bubble to be there right next to the paper, and then some, so that way we hopefully maintain our waterproof seal all the way around this map. Now that we've completed the self-lamination process of these maps, you can expect to have more of a water-resistant, if not waterproof experience when trying to navigate or use these types of maps. Not only is there an increased water resilience to these maps, it's also going to have more of a structural resilience to it as well. As you can see, it's a lot harder to try to rip these maps, puncture these maps, or damage these maps from regular use that you would see when you're out in the field. You also have the ability to write on these maps and take notes on these maps either on a permanent or semi-permanent level. Simply by using Sharpies, grease pencils, and also even whiteboard markers, you can make permanent or semi-permanent markings to be able to provide context not only to yourself, but if you're also working with other people on navigation or other things involving this map, you can make these notes and then share them with others as well. And then if you have an update to the plan that you're trying to use, or there's an update to the markings on the map, you can erase that, redraw it, and instead of having to print off another map if you've compromised it with markings already. Now that we've made these maps a little more resilient, let's test and see exactly how resilient they are to a couple of different tests that I've come up with. All right, so we're gonna start our testing with basically just a simple spray. What we're trying to show here is when you're out in the elements and you're getting either a misty, like a fog almost, or maybe even a light to heavy rain, how this will affect this map. For that, we're gonna be using a spray bottle, and it's just gonna be on the mist setting. For context, this is also the map where I had messed up the seal when we were practicing sealing these. So this will be a good indication to kind of show you how waterproof this actually makes these maps. Now, if this one starts to fail, we have the other two maps that we've created to hopefully be able to prove that just because I had a failure on sealing this does not mean that this method does not work. So this map now has been saturated with water. Again, this map is the map that had a bad seal. I'll try to kind of scoop water towards the edges here where the seal was not good. So that way we can hopefully see if we can force some water in there and see if there's a failure point. Zooming in here, hopefully we can see if there is any compromised edges, which it does not look like there is. Compromised edges will be kind of easy to see because you'll start to see a saturation effect where water will kind of start to bleed through onto this page. However, I'm not seeing anything that has been compromised on this. And again, this is the bad seal that we'd had before. And it has now been sitting in water for approximately a minute and a half. So let's try adding a little bit more water to see if we can kind of show more of a heavier rain or sustaining itself out in the rain for a longer period of time. So one thing that you can see here as well is even though this is pretty much saturated with water, you can flick the water off and you can still read this map, which is what's really important about being able to do this and have these quick lamination forms, is you have the ability to now make this map basically waterproof. We'll turn it over so we can get some more saturation on this side just to verify and see if anything occurs, an ill effect occurs from the amount of moisture that we have on this map. Okay, we're at about the 4-minute and 30-second mark of this map having constant moisture on it. Again, this is more of kind of like a rain instead of being completely submerged. Looking at these edges, I'm still seeing that there is nothing bleeding through, even though this is the seal that I had screwed up when I was first showing how to do this. So again, this is the bad seal. Also kind of showing how nice it is to have these permanent markers. These markings really stay for the most part on the map. So it's a testament of if you pre-plan a little bit and you use those permanent markings, it's a little bit easier for it to stay on this with this new surface that we have. We are now right around the 5-minute and 30-second mark from when we first started applying moisture to this map. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the lid to the spray bottle and submerge this map to see if we can gain full waterproofing from this method. As you can see, this map now has the ability to be completely submerged. So I'll push this underwater. We will see if there's any failure points as it sits here, and I can kind of already see one right here, which is where I think that seal didn't really sit properly. So we'll have this sit under the water for a little bit. And let's say we'll give it 5 minutes and then see what happens after 5 minutes. Okay, we are at 5 minutes and 30 seconds with the map with the bad seal being completely submerged underwater. Now, mind you, this is also 10 minutes into, probably about 11 minutes actually, into introducing this map to moisture originally from just misting and spraying. Now, hopefully what we can see is we've got each corner here. We're looking for any sort of saturation into this map. Now this area right here is where that seal didn't work correctly. So I don't know if you can see it on camera, but you can see 2 sections of this lamination. Now it starts to separate from one another, ultimately getting to where the paper is basically covered, or barely covered rather, down over here. And by moving my finger a little bit here, we can see that the lamination is kind of starting to separate. However, it's still providing an effective amount of coverage for this map, especially being completely submerged for that long. Now, oh, look at this. Now that I've kind of moved that lamination away a little bit, we can see where the paper is starting to get compromised. And let me try to zoom in a little bit more here. Move this camera so you can see basically what's happening here. So I'm pulling this lamination up. Again, this is the laminated sheet. There are now 2 sides that have been split. I'll pull this completely away and we'll resubmerge this into the water. Try to get the camera right here. So now we can kind of see this page is now extremely wet. However, it kind of stops right where that seal stops. Now, eventually over time, it'll kind of migrate a little bit, but it'll kind of keep it central to this area. You can now also see a little bit better the discoloration of what it looks like when we have a compromised seal. But this is also pretty good because, I mean, we now have this paper sitting completely underwater. Again, here's the other piece of lamination, and it's really staying central to this area. So what it's doing is it's actually protecting the rest of this map, even though there is a compromising factor with this corner. Again, this is completely underwater. So you would think if it would compromise the entirety of the map, it would have happened already. But yet, it's staying local to this area where that seal is broken. So what does that tell me? That tells me that even though we have an area where, like, let's say it gets punctured because we accidentally nick it with a knife, or again, we have a compromised seal, it's not going to ruin the entirety of your map, which is not at all how I thought that this was going to go. All right, I've removed the water, and again, really the only thing is this corner. So that's really positive. So even just putting this lamination on this map, you're going to maximize the ability that you're going to be able to use this map, especially when you're in inclement weather. So moving on from the waterproofing, let's try folding this and figuring out how rigid it is in situations where we need to maybe put it into a back pocket or a binocular case or in our backpack if there's not enough room for us to be able to store it the way it is. So I'll start by just simply folding this once in half. Really trying to make a good crease mark here. So we have an established crease. We'll fold it again here a second time. Really trying to make sure that we put as much pressure on these edges as possible. Okay, another solid crease there. We now have 4 creases. The map pretty much stays together. It looks like we're starting to get a little bit of an air pocket here in the center. Let me try to zoom in a little bit. So we're starting to get a little bit of an air pocket here. What we're ultimately doing is we're putting pressure on this end, and then these 2 ends as well with these solid folds. It's allowing for the possibility of air to come in from these seals. So now that we've kind of compromised potentially those seals, let's try dunking this again, and I might get a better bucket this time so I'm not balancing my way to a sink to empty that. We'll try submerging this and seeing if those specific areas start to leak now. Again, this is still the original one with the compromised seal. So this map's already doing really awesome. All right, I now have a bowl filled with water. I have our creased map, and I can really hear where the lamination's kind of starting to fail on the 2 sides. Folding this obviously is putting a lot of pressure and a lot of strain on the lamination, especially since this is not necessarily like a heat-induced lamination. So this is literally just basically putting 2 sticklers on either side of this map. So we'll try submerging this 5-10 minutes. That should be ample amount of time. We'll see if we start to get water coming in through one of these 4 areas. Again, this is our original map with the compromised seal. You can see lamination starting to separate. However, again, our lamination has been doing a great job about keeping this map intact, even though it was submerged under the water for over 10 minutes. So we'll again put this underwater, submerge it, and see if we get any negative or ill effects due to the folds that we've put onto it now. I'll also get this, hopefully, to keep it underwater for a little while, and we'll check back in about 5 to 10 minutes. All right, so that's 6 minutes there. I don't think we really need to watch it sit underwater for any longer. Super boring. So let's get the map out. Trying to leave it in screen so we don't have any naysayers out there. And opening it up and inspecting, get a little zoom in here. Each corner. Looks like that sill is still good. Looks like there's a little bit of water here, kind of working along the edge. Again, on this side, a little bit of water working its way in. And here as well, a little bit of water working its way in. And yeah, the first one I actually found an air pocket and water, you can see, traveled. I don't know how easily you can see, but that's inside the lamination there. Let's see if we can get some to come out. So you can see water is coming out of the lamination. So there was water inside of here. You can see there as well, there's a little bit of water. So what does that tell us for the overall scope of what we're doing here? So if we fold this map after it's been laminated with this cheaper style of just self-laminating sheets, understand that there is a possibility that you are going to compromise your seal. However, after being underwater for, what was it, 6 minutes, that's really all the damage we have, is we have some moisture in there. This is still a usable map. We still can see our, let's see if we can zoom in again. We can still see our grading lines. We can still see numbers. We can still see roadways. So really, what have we lost? We've lost a little bit of waterproofing. However, it's still a usable map. So if you need to put this in a smaller space, which is 8.5 by 11 inches, and you need to fold this up a couple of times, understand it'll still have water resilience. However, it will not be waterproof because it will work its way through those areas where you compromise the seal. But like everything, if you do a compromising fact, likely you're going to end up having a compromised product. And that's just something where you need to weigh out the pluses and minuses for your situation. So there are many different ways that you can choose to write on these maps after they've had this lamination applied to them. Some of the more common methods you will see are, we have permanent markers. This one has a bold and a fine tip. And this one also has a correction pen. We have dry erase markers. Again, another permanent marker. This one's just a fine point. And then we have a grease pencil as well. An important consideration when you're looking at permanent markers is to consider whether your marker is alcohol soluble or water soluble. So the alcohol soluble markers will be able to be erased with alcohol pads. And in events where you're using this marker in inclement weather like rain, the water is going to have little to no impact on the markings that you're making. Where the opposite of that, if you have a water-soluble marker, then that marker is going to be easily erased with water. So therefore, if you're using it in inclement weather like rain or any sort of moisture, it's gonna easily be erased and your markings can be gone. So that's why it's important to make sure you're choosing and using the correct tools for the job and also in the correct application that you have available to you. Next, I'm gonna go through using and erasing all of these different methods, so that way hopefully it provides you with enough context to be able to decide what's gonna be right for your application. To make this a little bit easier to see, I'm gonna use the reverse side of this map, so that way you can easily identify where the markings are and we can kind of see how they degrade, if they do, over time. So first off, we'll start with the Expo or dry erase marker. So we'll just draw a line. And I'll do the same with the blue as well. From there, I'll move on to the fine tip permanent marker. And then we have the Lumicolor permanent marker. I'll do both the bold side and the fine side so you can see the difference. So there's the bold side. and the fine side. And then I'll also use the grease pencil. So to start, let's just simply try running a finger through this to see if anything smudges or comes off when we do so. All right, so the top two, which are the Expo pens, easily able to be erased. Then we have our normal fine tip permanent marker. We have our Lumacolor fat and fine, and then the grease pencil to follow that. Now, I think what's happening with the grease pencil, because you can feel the crayon style material on top, and it's a lot more prevalent than the Sharpie or permanent markers. I think that basically just cleaned the ink from the dry erase and then kind of smudged that. So I don't think that this smudging is specific to that pencil, but that was a result from the ink up here being erased. Next, we'll use a little bit of water to kind of show if we're out in the rain. And I'll again wipe my finger through it to see if we can get any of this to smudge or erase. Okay, so you can see we've got water on the page. And we'll again just run a finger through this to see how it erases. All right, so again, our dry erase markers really easily able to be erased. Our fine tip permanent marker still looks as great as when we drew it. And that goes for the same as the Lumacolor, which is again also a permanent marker. And then our crayon, a little bit of degrading of the line work there, however, it is still visible. We are, however, starting to see a little bit of that line work starting to go away. And again, I still think some of this smudging here, because you can see a little bit of the blue in color, is from the ink gathering on my finger as I draw through this, and then coming off as it hits this crayon style of marking. I'm going to use a paper towel to try to wipe off all this water, and we'll see what's left after that. And there we go. So we'll zoom in a little bit more on these markings and kind of go over what we find. So now what we're seeing is we have both the dry erase markings have been removed completely, so they're kind of out of the question at this place. This next is the Marks a Lot version of a fine tip permanent marker. So this is would be a Sharpie alternative. And then we have the Lumacolor. And those are these two markings here, which actually held up a lot better than this Marks a Lot marker that we have. And then finally we have the grease pencil, which is kind of degrading over time. So from here, we're going to use the Lumacolor correction pen. And we're going to see how that affects some of these items. So we'll start with the permanent marker, that fine tip. Then we'll move to the Lumacolor specific, fine and bold. And then we have the grease pencil here. And we'll use the paper towel, try to get some of this wet spot off. Perfect. Okay, so again, the Marks a Lot version of the Sharpie fine point, that is kind of really starting to get degraded. We have the Lumacolor version of the permanent marker, which is the fine and the bold, and those really are holding up their markings the best. And then we move down to the grease pencil, which is almost completely gone, and I think, yep, I can just wipe the rest of it away with my finger there. And then finally, we have the alcohol prep pads. So we'll rip this open, and then this should do it. This should get the rest of the markings off of the page. And there we go. So what have we learned from that? Basically, if we're going to use Expo pens, one, we don't want to run our finger through it because that's going to smudge, or what it's going to do is completely erase it. So that's going to become very difficult for us to make markings on here and keep them over time. Now, that's not saying you cannot use Expo pens or, dry erase markers. What you'll have to do is you'll have to make sure that you don't get your hand in anything that you were writing on prior, because that, again, will have the possibility of smudging that marking. But once you're through making your markings, have whomever is going to be using those markings, or for yourself, take a photo of the markings so that way you have a record of it, and then you can easily wipe those away and then do further markings if needed. For the permanent marker, this specific version being the fine tip Marks A Lot marker, it's basically going to be up to the manufacturer and their specific mixture of ink that they use. Some inks are going to be a little bit more resilient, some less resilient in situations. So I suggest if you're going to be using a permanent marker, buy a couple different options and figure out which is the best for your application. Continuing on with the permanent markers, I think that the best one that we've seen so far in these situations is the Lumacolor. The Lumacolor is great. I think it's made in Germany. Yeah, you can find them on Amazon. You can find them in craft stores. I believe they're also refillable, so you don't have to throw this out every time it runs out of ink. You just refill it with whatever ink cartridge that you pat it onto it, and then it kind of fills up into the body. So really economically friendly. And from what we've seen is it's the best markings on this map for retaining the markings and clarity once we start kind of moving around, touching the map. Maybe if we spill water or coffee on it and then have to wipe that off, the Lumacolor appears to be your best option. And then the correction pen, yeah, it's all right. I think it's good for if you're going to be doing small corrections or if you want to be able to correct a really small area. However, the best option for that is going to be just the trusty old alcohol wipes. And then to conclude all of our writing utensils, we have the grease pencil, which is just kind of the meh version of everything that you saw. Now, there are a lot of applications where the grease pencil might be good, and then one of those applications might be specific to what you need. So just because I say it's a meh product, don't take my word for it. If it's something that you're going to use it. I'm not the one using it. You're the one that's going to use it. So don't take my word for it. Get out there, try it, and make sure you're using the best thing for your application. These laminated map sheets are great for many different applications. Some of them specifically that I can think of are hiking and hunting. So if you've got a spot where you've already planned to be, or where you would like to plan to research or look for animals or future hikes, having these maps printed out is great, especially if you have an electronic failure from like GPS or something like that. For law enforcement situations, things like events and situational planning are going to be paramount. You're going to have the ability to kind of pass these around. Other officers can take photos of it. If you're coordinating with different agencies, then having them be able to take photos of your maps and then giving these maps to your officers out there, it's going to be beneficial to the pre-planning and the execution of whatever it is that is your task at hand. Search and rescue efforts, another great method, because a lot of the times, again, we're not going to have service out there, and if you have a compromising factor with your electronic equipment, having maps is going to be paramount. Also having the ability to notate and document things like previous search areas or where other search groups are, having that on the map sometimes is a lot easier, especially if you're more of a visual learner. Forestry is another great one. You can kind of mark out where different timber boundaries are and where your logging operation is. You can also hand these to your crews to say, hey, here's how we get to our job site. This is a new job site, or hey, we want to focus on this quadrant of our timber access, so that way we're going to try to push here and then we'll work our way up. Whatever it is that you're doing in forestry, it's going to be a great tool for you. Other things like emergency preparedness. So if you're looking for evacuation routes, pre-planning evacuation routes, if you want to identify resources that are available to you. So the hospital is here, or our community center is here, and that's where we're going to be planning on meeting if there is something like a natural disaster. Also for situations like post-disaster relief. So like any sort of disaster relief, there's usually not internet, there's usually not cell phones, and there are some things that make it a little bit easier, but having a map specific for your area or for specifically to your neighborhood or your group, whatever it is you're planning with, that's going to help you be successful in times where it really matters. Another great one is wildland firefighting. So you can print this off of your area of work. You can say, hey, this is where we're going to be attacking. Hey, these are the structures we're trying to protect. Here's our access route. Here's our staging area. Here's where water staging is going to be, rehab. All of those different things, you're going to have the ability to mark those on this map, hand them to your firefighters, and then make sure that they have all the information they need to be successful and to stay safe in these situations. If there are other things that you can think of that would be really beneficial for these types of maps, leave a comment and let other people know. Spark interest and spark the ideas that you have to help other people understand the applications for these things, because it really is an important tool to have in your toolbox. Hopefully this video helped you find a better way to create more rigid maps, as well as better maps for using in the field, in inclement weather, or just during aggressive use. The simple act of laminating these sheets is going to help you use these maps further and further into the future, as well as be able to document things on these maps, erase them, and still be able to use the map instead of permanently marking on it, having to toss it and then get another map. If this video was helpful to you in any way, please hit the like button. If you have thoughts that were sparked from this video, make sure to leave a comment. Or if you have different tips or tricks that you use when you're using maps, specific to lamination or not, leave comments so other people can see that and hopefully learn from that. Also leave comments if you have ideas for other videos that you'd like to see. Another great place for that would be direct message from social media. So we have an Instagram and a Facebook, so feel free to reach out to us in both of those areas if you have ideas of things that you'd like to see, or you have comments for us that you would like us to see. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Subscription is free and it helps us by creating more availability for people to see these types of videos that we make, hopefully get some educational purposes out of it, and then better themselves because of that. I appreciate you all watching. Be sure to stay safe and make sure to get outdoors.